On the sunny morning in Buenos Aires, the city woke up with its usual buzz. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the smell of hot bread from the bakeries, as passersby hurriedly moved along the sidewalks, each immersed in their own thoughts and concerns. On the corner of a busy street, Miguel, a man with gray hair and a tired look, stood with his worn hat in front. With his face marked by time and life on the streets, he displayed an expression of serenity that contrasted with the hustle and bustle around him. With calloused hands, Miguel picked up an old guitar that had been with him for years, an instrument that, although worn, still resonated with the essence of his songs. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle breeze blowing before he began to pluck the strings. The music that emerged from his guitar was a nostalgic melody, infused with sadness and hope, reflecting the many stories he carried in his heart. The song echoed down the street, enveloping passersby in an aura of emotion. As the chord spread, some people began to stop. A young woman in a colorful scarf smiled and began to nod, while a man in a suit, hurrying on his way to work, hesitated, looking away at the old singer. Miguel opened his eyes and saw the attention his music was attracting. He smiled, feeling the connection forming between him and the listeners, if only for a brief moment. "You sing beautifully, old man," shouted a woman passing by, stopping to throw some coins into Miguel's hat. He thanked her with a nod, the singer's voice rising even higher, permeated with a warmth that echoed the beauty of life. It was a dance of voices and chords, a dialogue between the artist and the audience, even if most of them didn't know the secrets that each song carried. Meanwhile, on one of the floors of an elegant glass building, Alvaro, a lonely millionaire, observed the scene through his office window. He was surrounded by documents and graphs that didn't spark his interest, his mind wandering between work and the loneliness that accompanied it. The sad melody that echoed through the city captured his attention in an unexpected way, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The notes floated to him like an invitation to a world he had left behind. Alvaro approached the window, looking at the street below. He saw Miguel with his wrinkled face and serene expression, and felt a mixture of compassion and nostalgia. The man on the corner of the street seemed so far removed from his reality of luxury and isolation, as if someone could really touch the soul like that, thought Alvaro, remembering his own attempts to connect with the world, which always ended in frustration. He turned away from the window and looked back at his papers, but Miguel's song still resonated in his mind. At the end of the day, already tired of his lonely work, Alvaro made a decision. He put on a dark coat and walked out of his mansion, feeling the cool night breeze. He walked through the streets of Buenos Aires, each step guiding him towards the source of that melody that had touched him so deeply. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but something inside him cried out for that connection. When he arrived at the corner where Miguel was still singing, the scene was the same, but the atmosphere was charged with vibrant energy. Alvaro stopped a few steps behind the elderly man, listening intently to the words of his song. Miguel sang about lost loves and forgotten hopes, his vocal cords conveying a pain that was almost palpable. Alvaro took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Finally, he decided to approach. With a hesitant gesture, he left some money notes in Miguel's hat. The old singer stopped his song, looking at the new spectator in surprise. "Thank you, friend," Miguel said with a sincere smile, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Music is my bread, but kindness is what feeds me." "You sing with a passion that I haven't seen in a long time," Alvaro replied, his voice a little shaky. "It's like you're telling stories we've all forgotten. Stories and songs, my friend. They all have a place in your heart," Miguel replied, his voice deep and comforting. "Sometimes we just need someone to listen." Alvaro felt a tightness in his chest. That simple yet deeply meaningful interaction made him feel less alone. It was as if, for an instant, the walls around his heart were crumbling. He wanted to say more, wanted to share something about his own life, but words failed him. Instead, he just nodded and started to walk away. As he walked back, his emotions were in turmoil. He couldn't stop thinking about Miguel and the music that accompanied him. The melody continued to echo in his mind, a reminder of everything he had lost over the years. Alvaro's life was surrounded by wealth, but at the same time it was devoid of love and genuine connection. That night, as he settled into his luxurious bed, Alvaro couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Miguel and his song danced in his mind. He turned from side to side until he finally decided that he needed to do something about the strange and powerful feeling that had invaded him. What started as a simple act of compassion could turn into something much greater. He closed his eyes and for a moment imagined the old singer, his voice echoing through the city, touching people's hearts. What could he do to help? Alvaro knew he had the means, but what about the courage? The need to change something in his life began to grow within him, just as Miguel's melody settled in his soul. As the stars shone over Buenos Aires, each one seemed to shine with the promise of new possibilities. And so, with his heart beating with new hope, Alvaro fell asleep, dreaming of music, and a future where the lives of a lonely millionaire and a beggar singer would intertwine in unexpected ways. Miguel observed the empty hat in front of him, reflecting on Alvaro's unexpected generosity. The morning sun illuminated the corner where he usually stood, and the city of Buenos Aires pulsed around him with a frenetic rhythm. He took a deep breath, smelling the aroma of fresh bread coming from a nearby bakery. With the money he had received, he decided it was time to do something different, buy food, and perhaps a little treat for himself. He walked slowly to the bakery, the sound of his worn boots echoing on the uneven stones of the sidewalk. "A loaf of bread, please," he asked the attendant, a young man with a warm smile who seemed to notice Miguel's fragility. "Here it is, sir." "Can I offer a coffee too?" offered the boy, generous in his gesture. Miguel hesitated for a moment, but the idea of a coffee in his hand appealed to him. "Of course a coffee would be great," he replied with a shy smile. He paid with the coin he had left after buying the bread, feeling a little lighter. He sat on a nearby bench, enjoying the bread and coffee. At that point, people were rushing past, each immersed in their own worlds. Miguel observed them all, each face a story, each step a destination. However, the loneliness he felt was a persistent shadow, a constant companion that seemed to amplify the sad melody he sang. He sighed, bringing the cup of coffee to his lips, and reflected on how, even surrounded by a crowd, he sometimes felt more isolated than ever. Meanwhile, Alvaro in his mansion sat in his vast library, surrounded by books he had never read. The silence in the room was almost deafening, and he found himself looking out the window, where the blue sky contrasted with the sadness he felt inside. Miguel's melody still echoed in his mind, like a distant echo that called him to a time and place he would rather forget. Reluctantly, he decided that he needed to find something to do, something that would take him out of that state of apathy. That's when his eyes fell on a dusty old photo album, kept on a shelf. He pulled out the album, and upon opening it, he was invaded by memories of his childhood. The photos showed a smiling boy with shaggy hair and bright eyes, in a humble home, surrounded by love, but also hardship. Alvaro stopped at the image of a birthday party, where an old guitar was hanging on the wall. The boy in the image was playing so happy. Longing squeezed his heart. "How did I lose myself?" he whispered, his voice almost a lament. He turned the pages, each one revealing a new memory, and Miguel's melody mingled with the laughter of the past. The man he had become seemed so far away from that dreamy boy. Driven by sudden inspiration, Alvaro felt an intense desire to do something meaningful. He thought about Miguel, the sad glow in his eyes, and how a simple change could brighten his life. A guitar, he thought, it would be a gift that could rekindle the flame of music in your soul. He closed the album, determined to do something that would make a difference. That morning, Alvaro decided to visit a musical instrument store. He walked through the streets of Buenos Aires, feeling the cool breeze on his face, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. When he arrived at the store, the smell of new wood and leather enveloped him. The salesman, a man with gray hair and an easy smile, greeted him. "What can I help you find today, sir?" asked the salesman, observing Alvaro curiously. "I would like to see your guitars," replied Alvaro, feeling a warmth spread in his heart. The idea of giving Miguel a gift made him excited. The salesman led him to a section where guitars were displayed. Each one was a work of art, with meticulously crafted details. Alvaro stopped in front of a dark wooden guitar with a shine that seemed to reflect the light in a special way. "This one is one of the best we have. It has a wonderful sound," said the salesman, noticing the interest in Alvaro's eyes. "Can I try?" Alvaro asked, hesitating for a moment before taking the guitar in his hands. He remembered how he used to play, how music gave him life, and for a moment he let nostalgia wash over him. He sat on a stool, strumming a few notes. The rich and nuanced sound transported him back to the time when he dreamed of being a musician. The salesman watched, impressed, as Alvaro played a soft melody, almost as if he was talking to his own soul. "You play very well," praised the seller, applauding softly. Alvaro stopped, a little embarrassed, and returned the guitar to its stand. "Thanks. I haven't played in years, but today I'm here for a reason. I want to buy a guitar for a friend." "A street singer," he said with a smile that lit up his face. "A noble gift," exclaimed the seller. "I'm sure he'll be very happy." When leaving the store, Alvaro held the guitar firmly, feeling lighter than in recent years. He walked through the streets, imagining Miguel's reaction when he received the gift. He visualized the smile on the beggar's face, the joy that could blossom like flowers in spring. At the corner where he used to meet Miguel, Alvaro stopped for a moment, nervous and anxious. What would go through the mind of a man who had spent so long in the shadows? He wanted Miguel to know that there was still goodness in this world, that his music still had power. When he finally saw Miguel, sitting on his bench with his hat in front of him, a mix of emotions took over Alvaro. He approached slowly, feeling the weight of the guitar in his hands. Miguel raised his head, surprised to see the millionaire who had left him a donation. Alvaro's expression was one of determination and affection. "Miguel," called Alvaro, his voice firm and clear. "I have something for you." Miguel frowned, intrigued. Alvaro held out the guitar, and the expression of disbelief on Miguel's face was palpable. He hesitated for a moment, as if afraid this was all just a dream. "For me?" asked Miguel, his voice shaking. "Is this a joke?" "No, it's serious," replied Alvaro, smiling sincerely. "I wanted to do something special for you. Music is a gift that must be shared." Miguel picked up the guitar with shaking hands, feeling the polished wood and the weight of the instrument. He looked at Alvaro, his eyes full of emotion. "This brings back the joy you deserve," Alvaro replied, his heart warmed by the connection that was beginning to blossom between them. Miguel tested the strings, and when he played the first note, a smile lit up his face. The melody that emerged was like a breath of life, and he looked at Alvaro with gratitude. "Thanks. Thank you very much. You really changed my life today." Miguel's words were loaded with deep meaning, and so, amid the hustle and bustle of the city, two lonely souls found a new purpose, united by music and generosity, that transformed a simple act into a memorable moment. The sun had not yet broken the horizon line in Buenos Aires, but the city was already pulsating with the energy of its inhabitants. On busy corners, the first rays of light touched Miguel's face, an elderly man with gray hair and a face marked by time. He positioned himself on the same corner as always, a place that had become his temporary home. With a hoarse voice, but full of melody, he began to sing a nostalgic song that talked about lost loves and faded dreams. The music, like an invisible thread, attracted passersby, who stopped for a few moments, enchanted by the sincerity and pain that appeared in each note. Meanwhile, in an imposing mansion, Alvaro observed the scene from his office window. He, a lonely millionaire, had a routine marked by solitude and silence. The melody that echoed in the streets seemed to awaken something inside him, a distant memory of his youth, a time when music was a constant companion. He let himself be carried away by the song, feeling a wave of emotions that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Alvaro's gaze fixed on Miguel, and a pang of compassion invaded his heart. After an exhausting day of work, Alvaro decided to leave home. He didn't know why, but something was pulling him towards that corner. As he passed Miguel, he felt touched by the sincerity of the song, and on impulse, left a small amount of money in the hat that was at the beggar's feet. Miguel looked up, surprised by the stranger's generosity. His lips curved in a smile of gratitude, a gesture that made Alvaro's heart warm. He continued on his way, but the image of the gray-haired man and the sad music never left his mind. The next morning, Miguel woke up to sunlight filtering through the cracks in an old shelter, an improvised corner that served as protection against the cold. He stretched, remembering the amount he had received the day before. "What am I going to do with this?" he thought, as he stood up and looked around. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and he decided that a good breakfast would be a worthy way to spend that money. After eating, Miguel sat down on the corner again, but there was something different in his spirit. He wondered if he should continue singing, or if the universe was giving him signs to give up. "Sometimes silence is more comforting," he muttered to himself, as he watched people rush by. Meanwhile, Alvaro was in a musical instrument store, surrounded by guitars of all types and sizes. The sound of strings resonated throughout the room, evoking memories of his youth. He approached a salesman, a middle-aged man with a curious look. "I'm looking for a special guitar," said Alvaro, his voice full of determination. "I want something that can touch the soul of whoever listens to it." The salesman smiled, recognizing the passion that emanated from Alvaro. "We have several options, sir." "Sir, what do you have in mind? Something classic, perhaps, or something more contemporary?" "Classic," replied Alvaro. "Something that conveys emotion, that has a story behind it." After trying out a few guitars, his hands finally found one that felt perfect. It was a guitar of exceptional quality, with a brilliant finish and a sound that made the heart flutter. "This is the chosen one," he declared, feeling that this instrument could change Miguel's life. With guitar in hand, Alvaro walked through the streets of Buenos Aires, his heart racing with anticipation. He wondered how Miguel would react to the gift. "It's just a guitar," he thought, trying to calm his anxiety, but for him, it could mean everything. The city was alive around him. But for a moment, Alvaro felt more connected to the world than ever before. Upon arriving at the corner where Miguel used to sing, Alvaro stood for a moment, watching the beggar. The man was there as always, but today there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. Miguel looked at the ground as if pondering his choices. "Maybe I should stop this," he muttered to himself. "Music is something that belongs to the distant past." Then Alvaro approached, the guitar under his arm. "Miguel?" he called, his voice soft but firm. The beggar looked up, surprised to see the man who had given him money the day before. "Yes, it's me," he replied a little suspiciously. Alvaro took a deep breath. "I brought you something." He held out the guitar towards Miguel, who remained motionless, looking at the instrument as if it were a magical object. "This is for me?" he asked, disbelief tinging his voice. "A new guitar?" "Yes," said Alvaro, smiling. "I thought you could use this to play your songs. That I believe that music is a gift, and you deserve to have the best tool to express your art." Miguel's expression went from confusion to genuine joy, but it was soon replaced by fear. "But why would you do that?" "I'm just a beggar," he said, his eyes teary. "Because I saw something in you that touched me," Alvaro replied, his voice full of emotion. "Your music has a truth that is rare to find. I want you to share it with the world." Miguel hesitated, holding the guitar delicately. "I don't know if I'm worthy of this," he whispered, looking at the floor. "What if I fail? What if no one wants to hear my songs?" "Don't worry about it now," Alvaro said, encouraging him. "Music is about what you feel, not what others think. Let your heart guide you." The wisdom in Alvaro's words made Miguel reflect. He looked at the guitar and then at the man in front of him, who seemed so genuinely interested in his well-being. I don't know what to say," Miguel finally said, his voice breaking. "This is a precious gift, thank you." He felt a warmth in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. Il tried to live up to it. The connection between them strengthened at that moment, and for a moment the loneliness they both carried seemed a little lighter. Miguel, with guitar in hand, looked up at the sky, as if asking for courage to face what was to come. The melody that had been hidden inside him began to emerge, and without realizing it, he began to play some soft notes. While Alvaro watched with a smile on his face, his heart filled with hope. Miguel, now holding the guitar with a mix of disbelief and joy, felt that the weight of years of loneliness and disillusionment was beginning to dissipate. He examined it carefully, the details of the finish shining in the afternoon sunlight. The polished wood and new strings seemed to vibrate with an energy he hadn't felt in a long time. When looking at Alvaro, who was watching him with a shy smile, Miguel felt a warmth in his chest, a gratitude that words could not express. "Did you really do this for me?" Miguel asked, his voice hoarse and emotional. "Yes, Miguel, music is an important part of life. And I wish you could go back to doing what you love," Alvaro replied, his gaze sincere and encouraging. Miguel placed the guitar against his chest and, on impulse, began to play a soft melody that echoed in the streets, a song he had always kept to himself. The first notes were shy, but they quickly turned into firmer, more confident chords. Passersby who had previously hurried past began to stop, attracted by the music that now filled the air. The melody, tinged with nostalgia, seemed to tell the story of a man who had faced many storms, but who still had hope. The crowd began to form, and Miguel felt the energy of the crowd. He looked at the faces that lit up as the music came to life, and a sense of belonging washed over him. Among the listeners, there were young people, old people, and even children, all standing still, as if time had stopped for a moment. Miguel smiled, forgetting for a moment the difficulties of life on the streets. "That's incredible, Miguel," Alvaro shouted, almost without meaning to, letting out the emotion he felt at seeing the man he had helped blossom before his eyes. Miguel smiled at him, a smile that spoke more than 1,000 words. The music grew, and Miguel felt that each chord played was a piece of his soul that was released, a cure for his emotional wounds. He remembered moments in his life, the nights he sang to warm himself, and the mornings that followed, filled with loneliness. But now the guitar in his hands was a bridge that connected him to all those who listened to him. With each song, Miguel began to tell stories. He talked about lost love, the pain of loneliness, and the beauty that still existed in life. The letters flowed like a river, and with each word he felt lighter. The people around him seemed to feel it too. Some were crying, others were laughing, but everyone was involved in the magic that was unfolding there. "You are a true artist," exclaimed a gray-haired woman with tears in her eyes. "I have never seen anything so beautiful." Miguel nodded gratefully, feeling more alive than ever. He finished the song with one last powerful note, and at the end the crowd erupted in applause. Alvaro was at the front, applauding enthusiastically, genuine joy shining on his face. Miguel got down from the cloud he was in and went to Alvaro, who wrapped him in a tight hug. "You really gave me something I thought I lost forever," Miguel said, his voice cracking a little. "I just gave you the opportunity to shine again," Alvaro replied, his eyes shining with the same intensity as the music that echoed in his heart. As the days went by, the presentations became frequent. Miguel began to become a beloved figure on the streets of Buenos Aires, and with each new song he felt that it was not just the music that was being shared, but also a part of himself. He made friends among the other street artists, and together they began to form a small, mutually supportive community. As Miguel flourished, Alvaro watched, increasingly inspired. He spent hours in his mansion, surrounded by sheet music of songs he never had the courage to play. There was a dusty guitar in the corner, a legacy from his younger days that he had cast aside when ambition took over his life. Now, upon seeing Miguel, he felt a deep calling within himself to reconnect with music. One night, while Miguel was performing in a crowded square, Alvaro decided it was time to act. He approached the dusty guitar, his tentative fingers sliding across the strings. There was an unconfessed fear that the music had abandoned him. But when he played the first note, a wave of nostalgia enveloped him. He remembered his childhood, the afternoons spent playing with friends, the dreams he had before he lost himself in a world of business and money. That same night, while Miguel was performing, Alvaro decided he would do something unexpected. He went up on stage, taking the guitar from Miguel's hand, who looked at him in surprise. "Alvaro, what are you doing?" Miguel asked, a mix of confusion and excitement in his eyes. "I want to play with you," Alvaro replied, determination in his voice. He turned to the crowd and said, "This is a song I wrote many years ago. Hope you like it." Miguel, a little hesitant, nodded and positioned himself next to Alvaro, and so together the two men began to play, the music flowing like a river that had been dammed for too long. The crowd's surprise was palpable, but soon the applause and voices of support rose, creating a chorus that filled the square. The notes sounded like a dialogue between the two, and the music brought them together in ways they never imagined. And as they played, Miguel realized that it wasn't just his life that was changing, but Alvaro's as well. He saw his friend open up, free himself from the shackles that bound him to the past. "You have an incredible voice," Miguel shouted during a break in the music. "And you are an inspiration," Alvaro replied, a happy smile on his face. The music continued to echo through the night, and each chord seemed to tell a new story, uniting the experiences of two men who, despite being so different, were linked by an invisible thread. Hearing the claps and screams of joy, Miguel realized that life was transforming, and that music, which before was just a form of survival, was now a path to healing and reconnection. At that moment, as the two played, Miguel and Alvaro were no longer just a beggar and a millionaire. They were two men who had finally found each other, and, through music, were beginning to rediscover their lives. Miguel settled into a small makeshift platform surrounded by a growing group of people who had gathered to listen to his music. With the new guitar, his hands danced across the strings with a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. The notes coming from the instrument seemed to fill the air with a vibrant energy. The melody was infectious, and soon people's faces lit up, reflecting the joy that the music brought. He felt the warmth of recognition, that same warmth that had eluded him for so long in the cold nights of Buenos Aires. "You're really getting better, Miguel," shouted a gray-haired woman who always stopped to listen to him. "The music you play now is like a warm hug." "Thank you, Mrs. Rosa," replied Miguel, smiling. The woman was one of his most ardent fans and always had a smile and a word of encouragement. "It's you who inspires me to play with so much love." Alvaro watched from afar, hidden under the shade of a tree. He didn't feel comfortable blending into the crowd, but he couldn't look away from Miguel. The transformation of the man who was once just a beggar, now a central figure in those performances, was something that touched his heart deeply. He remembered his own youth when he also dreamed of being a musician. Music, art, what mattered most in his life, now seemed so distant. The contrast between Miguel's happiness and the loneliness that consumed him seemed increasingly stark. "Why don't you introduce yourself too, Alvaro?" murmured a familiar voice beside him. It was Clara, his assistant, who had accompanied him on his walks around the city. "You always said you had a passion for playing the piano. Why not seize this moment and join in?" "No, Clara, this is something I left behind," he replied, shaking his head in refusal. "Now I'm just a spectator." "You know that's not true. The music still lives inside you. Look at Miguel. He found his voice again, and so can you." Her words echoed in his mind. Miguel had truly found something special. He not only played but told stories through music, as if each chord was a piece of his soul. Alvaro felt his heart sink when he realized that while Miguel was getting back on his feet, he himself was sinking deeper into his empty routine. That night, Miguel was invited to perform at a small event, a celebration of local artists in a city square. He was nervous, but the anticipation of performing in front of a larger audience made him excited. Upon arriving at the venue, he saw a small crowd already gathered, eager to hear the performances. He felt like he was about to step onto a stage bigger than anyone he had ever met. "You're going to rock, Miguel," encouraged a young man he had met at one of the previous performances. "Everyone here has come to listen to you." Miguel just smiled, feeling a mixture of anxiety and joy. When it was his turn, he went up to the small stage and looked at the audience. He took a deep breath and started playing. The music flowed like a river, carrying with it the sorrows of the past and the loneliness of the present. "This song is for everyone who, like me, found a refuge in music. It's a reminder that we are never alone. Even when everything seems dark," he said, his voice shaking slightly. While Miguel performed, Alvaro was in the audience, absorbing every word, every note. He felt touched by Miguel's sincere statements. Tears started to slide down his face, but he didn't care. What Miguel said resonated in his heart, as if he were singing directly to him. Alvaro realized that the loneliness that surrounded him was not just the result of his wealth, but of a deep disconnection with who he really was. After the performance, Miguel came down from the stage, surrounded by applause and praise. He was exhausted, but happy. A group of people approached, congratulating him and asking about his songs. It was as if he had become a little rising star, and it made him radiant. "You were incredible, Miguel," said a young woman, her eyes shining with admiration. "When you talked about finding refuge in music, I felt it firsthand. You really touch our hearts." "Thanks, friend," he replied, a wide smile on his face. "Music is everything to me. It's what keeps me alive." Meanwhile, Alvaro walked away from the crowd, feeling overwhelmed by emotion. He walked through the streets of Buenos Aires, remembering the moments of his childhood, the dreams he had, and how, over the years, he had moved away from them. He thought about his family, how he had left everything behind in search of money and success. And now, what really was there? An empty mansion and a heart full of longing. He remembered when he composed songs on the piano, when music filled his days with joy. But at some point, ambition took over, and he put aside his passion. What did he really want at that moment? What could make you feel whole again? Miguel had found his voice, and Alvaro wondered if he could still find his. The next day, as the sun rose over Buenos Aires, Miguel woke up with renewed energy. He felt lighter, as if the music had freed him. The phone rang, and it was an invitation to another performance, this time in a cafe that was beginning to stand out in the city's art scene. Euphoria took over him. Not only was music changing his life, but it was also creating a new community around him. "You won't believe it, Rosa," shouted Miguel to the woman who always supported him. "I was invited to play at Café Central." "That's wonderful, Miguel," replied Rosa, with a radiant smile. "You deserve all this recognition. Music is its true essence." Miguel smiled, feeling more than ever part of something bigger. He needed to tell Alvaro about his new opportunities. He wanted the millionaire to know that his gift had changed not only his life, but the lives of many around him. In the cafe, as he prepared to play, he looked at the audience and felt Alvaro's presence there, watching him. Miguel had no idea what was going on in the mind of the man, who was once a stranger, but had now become an important part of his story. He began to play, and the music echoed through the space, carrying with it their hopes and desires, intertwining their lives in ways they had never even imagined. Miguel was exhausted, but the adrenaline from his recent show was still pulsing through his veins. He had performed in a small theater, a place brimming with light and warmth. The audience was enchanted, applauding and asking for more. The smile on his face was radiant, a mixture of joy and disbelief. He could hardly believe what had happened. Music, which was once just a way of survival, had now turned into a renewed passion. However, as he walked through the streets of Buenos Aires, there was still a shadow of doubt hanging over his mind. As Miguel walked away from the theater, he was approached by a well-dressed man who seemed anxious. "You're Miguel, right? The singer who enchanted everyone tonight?" The businessman, a man with gray hair and a persuasive look, extended his hand in a gesture of friendship. "My name is Leonardo. I am a music producer, and I would like to talk to you about a contract to release your album." The proposal left Miguel astonished. He hesitated, looking at the businessman suspiciously. "A contract? I don't know. I like to sing freely without constraints. I don't want to lose that." Miguel felt that music was his essence, his way of connecting with the world. The idea of a contract felt like a burden, a prison. Leonardo smiled, trying to calm him down. "I understand your concern, but think about the possibilities. You can reach people you never imagined. Your music can touch lives, Miguel. It's time to share your story with the world." The businessman's words resonated in his mind, but doubt still prevented him from taking the next step. It was then that Alvaro appeared, observing the scene from a distance. He was there, leaning against a post, looking thoughtful. His presence was comforting, and Miguel felt an impulse to get closer to him. The millionaire, who until that moment had been a distant figure in his life, seemed to understand the internal struggle that Miguel was facing. "Hi, Miguel. What is happening?" Alvaro asked, his voice low and warm. Miguel looked at him, a gleam of hope in his eyes. "Leonardo is offering me a contract to record an album, but I don't know if I should accept it. I feel like this could change everything, and I don't want to lose my freedom." Alvaro hesitated, remembering his own trajectory. He had been a promising musician in his youth, full of dreams and hopes, until ambition took him away from his true passion. "I understand what you're feeling, When I was younger, I also had a passion for music, but I let ambition consume me. I ended up moving away from what really mattered. Were you a musician too? Miguel asked, surprised. The revelation was unexpected, but somehow it made sense. Yes, I was, Alvaro replied, his gaze distant. Music brought me joy, but when things started to get serious, I lost myself. I don't want you to make the same mistake. Alvaro's words penetrated Miguel's heart. He began to see the situation in a new light. So what do I do? Should I accept the contract or refuse and continue singing in the streets? Miguel was distressed, as his desire to be heard fought against his fear of losing his freedom. You should do what makes you happy, Miguel. But remember, music is a part of who you are. Don't let fear stop you from moving forward, Alvaro said, his voice firm. Miguel reflected on this, wondering if he was really prepared to take that leap. As the conversation unfolded, something inside Miguel began to change. He felt there was a deeper connection between them. Alvaro, have you ever felt alone, even though you're surrounded by people? Miguel asked, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, many times. Success can be lonely. Fame brings people around you, but they are not necessarily friends. Sometimes it's easier to isolate yourself than to open yourself up to love and friendship, Alvaro replied, a touch of melancholy in his voice. But when you find someone who really cares, it's worth it. Music, like relationships, is about connection. Miguel nodded, feeling that those words resonated deeply with him. I would like to find that connection, he murmured, almost to himself. Alvaro noticed Miguel's vulnerability and felt an impulse to open up even more. You know, Miguel, I have a story you need to hear, a story about family and loss. Miguel looked into Alvaro's eyes, intrigued. Family? The man who once seemed so distant now became someone he could identify with. Yes, Alvaro began, his voice shaking slightly. I had a younger brother. His name was Miguel too. He ran away from home in search of fame, and I never managed to find him. It haunts me to this day. Alvaro's words left Miguel speechless. He felt a chill run down his spine, an unexpected connection forming between them. Are you saying you can be my brother? Miguel hesitated, disbelief taking over his being. Alvaro looked away, the weight of the revelation weighing on his shoulders. Yes, I believe so. I left many years ago, and you stayed. Regret not coming back. Music separated us, but now, here we are. Miguel felt a wave of emotions. The confusion, the pain, the misunderstanding, everything was mixed inside. How is this possible? I thought you were just a rich man, far from my reality. I am more than that, Miguel. I am someone who lost everything because of ambition and the pursuit of a life that did not bring me happiness. But now here, before you, I see a second chance, Alvaro confessed, tears beginning to well up in his eyes. The silence that followed was charged with meaning. Miguel looked at Alvaro, seeing not only a lost brother, but also a man who had fought his own battles. So what do we do now? Miguel asked, his voice shaking. Let's go together, Miguel. Let's face this together. You don't have to accept the contract if you don't want to, but now you have someone on your side. We are no longer alone, Alvaro responded. The determination in his voice was palpable. Miguel nodded, feeling a wave of relief. So I will refuse the contract, at least for now. I want to do this for me, for the music, and for us, he said, a smile forming on his face. The connection that had formed between them at that moment was unbreakable. It wasn't just about music or fame, but about family, love, and the true essence of what it means to be human. And so, with the road ahead, Miguel and Alvaro prepared to explore a new chapter of their lives. Together. Dear seniors, we want you to keep receiving amazing stories and content made especially for you. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos. Also, if you found this video helpful, give it a like. Every like is an encouragement for us to continue bringing valuable stories to all of you. Let's enjoy every moment together with more joy and knowledge.